I I already knew a lot about trauma from scholarly pursuits from the classroom, but what I learned going through workplace abuse and what I learned from my own experiences was really different. Like the lived experience taught me a lot more about sort of the emotional, mental health, spiritual impacts of trauma. And that is really important to know. And it's so, I feel like that's what caused me to be here today, too, how important it is for people that are in this experience to just get that validation of the level of harm this does to us. Um, and and because this happens to you, it for me, one of my coping ways is to really get to the like make sense of it, try to understand it, get to the bottom of it. And so having the intellectual ways of understanding were really helpful for me. um Deb's work was so helpful for me. Um, to come to this, the way that Deb had laid out a lot of the workplace abuse as a playbook, as here's how it goes down, it's so useful to see that this isn't about me, Amy, this is about something bigger than me. And that's really my hope for today, for what I'm talking about today, is that you can see that um, this experience really causes us to blame ourselves, to doubt ourselves. Um, and that's about the experience, not about you. And that's why I have this Brene Brown quote here. The most dangerous stories we make up are the narratives that diminish our inherent worthiness. We must reclaim the truth about our lovability, divinity, and creativity. That I know for me, going through workplace bullying, I gained so much of my sort of value and self worth from work and feeling like I was a smart, capable worker. And then when you're going through this experience, um, it, it's so much more. It's your very identity on the line, and that hurts how you see yourself. And I feel like that causes so much of the harm of how you can advocate for yourself, how you show up. Not it does harm not just in your life at work, but in your life at home, in your life with your friends, in your life with your significant others, with your children if you have them, with your parents if you're with them. um and that's the harm that people don't talk about, and that really hurts. And so that's why we're talking about it, because increased insight is what leads to better mental health outcomes. That's sort of what we're always going for in the realm of therapy and mental health. What we're aiming for is better understanding. When you understand what's happening, then you're going to have better strategies to have the outcomes you want. And I know, at least for me, and probably for many of you, it took me a long time to even figure out what was happening in my workplace situations. I didn't really have the language to understand workplace bullying or what was any of the stuff. I didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't really know what was going on. And I feel like that's so much about mental health and trauma. We barely even realize what's going on. Um, and we're impacted by it. Just recognition that you may feel alone in your individual experience, but you are not alone in the bigger picture experience. um that this in some ways is what happens to people in the systems of oppression, in a culture that does not value people equally, and a culture that doesn't value women, and a culture that doesn't value people of color, and a culture that for so many reasons. Um, so just recognizing that it's not you and trying to find a little bit of happiness. What underpins so much of what's going on here is stigma. There's so many different stigmas at play. The main stigma I'm talking and thinking about here is stigma around mental illness and mental health, and anything in the realm of sort of feelings in our culture is treated like it's not even a thing, like it's nothing. Anything in the realm of mental health, we talk about it as the stigma of mental illness. And the definition of stigma is a mark of disgrace or infamy, a stain or reproach as on one's reputation. With that definition, you can see why already people would be challenged to speak of this at all. Stigma is a barrier that keeps individuals from seeking or getting any sort of help at all. It happens at all levels, meaning we stigmatize ourselves as individuals. There's stigma within our families, groups, systems, cultures. Even as a therapist, I know that I'm taking a risk when I talk about my own depression or anxiety or anything I disclose about my own mental health. I know that I am going to be judged. I'm going to be judged by my own profession. I'm going to be judged by colleagues. And I have to weigh that out and what that means. And it has definitely cost me to be like, this is real. And I can talk about it as how wrong and how bad it is, but it is a reality. This cartoon I always sort of bring out because I think it helps me also like show the just ridiculousness of this, yet it is very real. This cartoon, it's the exact same picture in the top frame and the bottom frame. The top frame is labeled physical illness and the bottom mental illness. The guy says, I feel like I'm dying. And his helper says, we need to get you to the hospital as soon as possible with a physical illness. In the bottom frame, when he says, I feel like I'm dying, his helper says, just try and remember, a lot of people have it a lot worse. That is what so many of us have heard. We've heard those things, and those are the messages we get. A lot of times when I'm talking about this, I ask people if they've known someone that has died from suicide. And the vast majority of us know someone who's died of suicide, right? That is mental illness taking your life. Mental illness kills people just as frequently, effectively, as physical illness. Yet we act like it isn't real or it's not important. Why do we do that? It makes no sense. It's so invalidating, yet that is what we do in our culture. We act like it's not a thing. And here we are. Many people would rather tell an employer they served time in jail than admit to being in a psychiatric hospital. If you had your appendix out, you would have zero shame in telling that to your employer. Yet if you needed to go to the hospital psychiatrically, you would really consider that maybe you could tell them you were in jail instead. That is devastating, devastating. Any sort of victimization at all as a victim of a workplace bully carries stigma with it. Right there, we know we're up against something heavy. Many of us, I'm sure, are not talking about what we're going through. We haven't told people what this has been like. And we know that anytime you ask for help, there's this perception that you're weak. Not true. We would not perceive it as a weakness for you to go to the doctor because your blood pressure is high. We would not call you weak for that. We would reprimand you. We would give you a hard time if you didn't go to the doctor for that in physical illness. Yet in mental illness, we do the reverse. So please just take that for what it's worth and recognize that like this is real. The harm this is doing to us is real. It's also important to consider culture and intersectionality. If you're not somebody who's always on college campuses, you might not have heard this term before, intersectionality. What it means is that all of us we're more than one thing. We belong to more than one group. We have different identities. We have an identity around our race. We have an identity around our gender, around our national origin, around an ability, a disability, our sexual orientation, all of these things. And we know, although our culture often denies it, that all of these identity groups are not afforded the same amount of power. We know that in our country, in our culture, men are afforded more power than women. At present, they are allowed to make decisions on behalf of women. We know in our culture that if you are a white person, white identifying person, you have more power than a Black, Indigenous person of color would have. We deny that, we pretend that isn't true, but that is gaslighting. We know that depending on your abilities, all of these pieces of identity are going to impact how much power we have. In the workplace, your position on the hierarchy is going to play out significantly in how much power you have, yet we act like that's not a thing. We act like we can do mediation between a boss and an employee, and that's fine, that one person, that they both have equal power, and that is nonsense. So this is another thing that comes into play that absolutely impacts our mental health. The identity groups you belong to are going to impact how much stigma you face and your baseline stress level. And the fact that these power differences are not acknowledged or validated also is going to impact our baseline stress level. So sort of that was a little bit of stage setting, hopefully, to talk about the actual definition of trauma. And what we're kind of talking about here is psychological trauma. And how that's defined is as an occurrence which is outside the scope of everyday human experience and which would be notably distressing to almost anyone. That's from the American Psychiatric Association. It's not the event, the thing that happened, that determines whether it's traumatic, but the individual's experience of the event. It could be a single occurrence or a chronic repetitive experience. Those are the things that are more likely to give you complex trauma. It generates secondary adversities, life changes, and distressing reminders. It engages the fight, flight, friend response. It's cumulative, meaning it builds on top of each other. So all of these things, when you kind of hear this definition, hopefully it's really connecting to a lot of things that you're likely going through in workplace abuse, workplace trauma, right? So somebody can sort of not the event itself that determines whether it's traumatic, but your experience of the event. Those are the kinds of things that happen in workplace abuse. I have a friend who's a therapist who gave this example of someone she was seeing that talked about growing up, his mother never gave him any brownies. And like objectively, that might sound like wah, 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 get a real problem. That's not a big deal. But like the reality of it was this whole twisted, mean, psychological, cruel thing. Like he really liked brownies. and his mom intentionally made brownies for other kids and not him, and did this, like, made the thing that he liked the most and like lorded it over, like it was this really sadistic, cruel thing. But from outside looking in, you wouldn't know that, but it was when you got the full story. And that is like, that sort of vignette also reminds me, like, to believe people when they tell you like something was traumatic for them, to say like, really, come on. Like, when every single time I've doubted it, when I've really gotten to the bottom, I'm like, oh wow, yeah, like people like believe them. But this stuff, right? It might not sound bad, but if the person's telling you that somebody is hurting them or doing something harmful, they are. Um, when bad things happen, it's usually just the first bad thing. That was definitely one of my big learnings, and especially in workplace trauma. It, like, somebody starts messing with your livelihood, and then then it really takes its toll. You start eating a lot more, and now you're gaining weight, and now this thing's happening, and then the next thing's happening. And the death by a thousand paper cuts idea, like, things really build up. Um, and you're always sort of in this perpetual stress. Like, you're either you're responding to all of these stressors, and it is harming you at many levels. Um, a lot of the things we know about trauma and about stress, we've learned from veterans. We learned all, like, so much of our PTSD stuff we learned from veterans, but also we learned from the ACE study. And a lot of people that are in child development or in therapy probably have heard of the ACE study, but if you're not in those worlds, you may not have heard of it. It's about 30 years old now, and ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences.